He wasn't my brother by blood, but we had grown up under the same roof, shared the same dinner table, celebrated the same birthdays and holidays like any other siblings would. I was 20, he was 18, and for as long as I could remember, he'd been part of our family. When his parents passed away in a car accident, mine took him in. I was just 8 then. At first, he was shy and quiet, barely speaking a word. I remember the first time he smiled at me over a bowl of cereal and a silly knock-knock joke. Since then, we've been inseparable. Everyone called us siblings. We laughed like brother and sister, fought like brother and sister, and even looked out for each other like siblings should. But somewhere between school lunches and late-night talks, something changed, something unspoken, something subtle. He was always thoughtful, never missing a chance to ask how my day went, never forgetting my favorite snack or my favorite song. He noticed everything. When I cut my hair short, he complimented it before I could even ask if it looked okay. When I got my heart broken last year, he was the only one who didn't give me advice. He just sat beside me and let me cry without a word. I began to realize how much he meant to me, not just in a protective, sisterly way, but in a deeper sense. It was in the way he looked at me when I wasn't paying attention, or how his eyes softened whenever I spoke. There was this quiet tenderness in his presence that calmed me, that made me feel seen without trying too hard. And lately, I'd caught myself staring back a little too long, smiling a little too much when he was around. It was confusing. I knew what the world would say. I knew what my friends might assume. But this wasn't anything inappropriate or strange. It was simply a connection that had grown beyond a label. He wasn't just the boy my parents raised. He was my best friend, my safe space, the person who knew me better than anyone else. I remember one evening, we were sitting outside just watching the sky turn orange. I told him about my dreams of leaving our small town, maybe starting fresh in a city far away. He just listened, nodding, his gaze steady on mine. "Wherever you go," he said softly, "just don't forget where you're loved most." That moment stayed with me. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, like he wasn't just talking about family love, but something deeper, something more personal. At the time, I didn't know what to do with those feelings. So I did nothing. I let the silence stretch, thinking maybe it would pass. But it didn't. If anything, the quiet only made the emotions clearer. I was falling for someone I had grown up with, and the scariest part was how natural it felt. It started with a moment so ordinary, it almost slipped past unnoticed. I had just finished a long day, emotionally drained from an internship interview that didn't go well. I walked into the living room, and there he was, sitting quietly with a book in his hand. When he looked up and saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He just stood, opened his arms, and I walked into them without hesitation. That hug lasted longer than it should have. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It was grounding. I felt safe. I felt known. After that day, things shifted. I noticed how my heart reacted when he entered a room, how his laugh pulled one from me even when I was upset. We began spending more time together, but it felt different. There were pauses in our conversations filled with meaning, silences that said more than words could. One afternoon, he touched my wrist while laughing at something I said, and instead of brushing it off like always, I felt warmth travel up my arm. It was electric but calm, unfamiliar but deeply right. He noticed too. I could see it in his eyes. The way he lingered in the hallway before saying goodnight. The way his voice softened when he asked me how I was really doing. He had always cared, but now it was different. He was hesitant, measured, like he was waiting for permission to feel something more. We never said anything out loud. Maybe we were afraid to name it, afraid of what the world might think or how our parents would respond. But feelings don't wait for the right time. They grow quietly, and then one day they're too big to hide. That day came when we were cleaning out the garage. We were both covered in dust, laughing over old photos. He found one of us from when we were kids, me with my arm around his shoulder, both of us grinning ear to ear. He looked at it for a long time before saying, almost in a whisper, "You've always been home to me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat tightened. My chest felt heavy in a strange, beautiful way. We weren't just remembering the past. We were standing in the middle of something changing, something quietly blooming between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to his words, the tone of his voice, the way he looked at me like I was more than just part of his life. I was his life. But doubt crept in too. Was this just a phase? Were we confusing love with comfort? I questioned everything, but the feelings didn't go away. If anything, they became clearer. I didn't just miss him when he wasn't around. I longed for him. His presence made ordinary days feel full, like there was meaning in the smallest things. I had never felt that before, not even in my past relationships. There was no denying it anymore. I was in love with someone I had known all my life, and somehow, for the first time, I truly saw him. I started avoiding him without meaning to, not out of anger or rejection, but out of fear. Fear of what I was feeling, fear of crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I needed space to think, to breathe, to separate the comfort of our history from the truth of what was happening in my heart. He noticed the change immediately. He stopped sitting next to me during meals. He stopped asking about my day. The laughter faded. Our silence this time was different. It wasn't full of tension, just a quiet ache that grew heavier with every passing day. I buried myself in distractions, extra shifts, time with friends, long walks with no destination. I tried to convince myself that this distance was necessary, that things would reset if we just gave it time. But no matter where I went or who I was with, he was still the center of my thoughts. I'd hear a song and think of him. I'd see something funny and instinctively want to share it with him. His absence wasn't just noticeable, it was painful. He didn't chase me. He gave me space, maybe because he was hurting too, or maybe because he understood before I did that this kind of love needed clarity, not pressure. Still, every time I walked past his room or heard his voice from down the hall, I felt the pull. It wasn't just emotional. It was spiritual, deep, like our connection had always been written in some quiet, invisible language only we understood. One evening, I found a note tucked inside a book we used to read together. It wasn't dramatic, just a few lines, handwritten and simple. I don't know what I did wrong, but I miss us. I miss you. I'm here when you're ready. I stared at those words until my eyes blurred. He hadn't tried to explain anything or demand anything. He just opened a door and left it to me to walk through. That night, I replayed every moment we'd shared, not as siblings, not as housemates, but as people who had quietly built a bond that was deeper than labels. It wasn't confusing anymore. It was rare, and I was the one pushing it away out of fear of judgment, not because it felt wrong. So I went to him not with a plan or rehearsed words, but with honesty. I told him I was scared. I told him I didn't know how to define what we were, but I knew it felt real. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He just listened, eyes steady the way he always had. When I finished, he simply said, "I never wanted to make you uncomfortable. I just couldn't stop loving you the way I do." It was the first time either of us had said the word love out loud. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes love doesn't arrive the way people expect. Sometimes it grows quietly, patiently. And when it finally speaks, you don't doubt it, you feel it in your bones.